time, 5 interesting movies that I've watched recently and 5 that I'd like to sort of recommend to you in some way, shape or form. Let's start with new year, new label, new release. I'm going to talk about Radiance films, and I'm going to talk about, well, one of the 2 releases. I've watched both, thought both were great, but I'm going to highlight Big Time Gambling Boss. I flipped the artwork for those that are going, that's not the cover of that. It's the reverse artwork, and one that I think makes a nice contrast on the shelf with a nice red spine. Big Time Gambling Boss is, I mean, it's hard not to watch this and look. It's a Yakuza film very much in the style of Battles Without Honor and Humanity, but in truth is a bit more refined than that. From Kosuke Yamashita, and this one is set kind of a bit previous to Battles Without Honor and Humanity. And while Battles Without Honor and Humanity by Fukasaku kind of relies very much on the handheld nature and shooting of those kind of films, this one has a very much more sedate approach, as we have a Yakuza gang where the leader is on the verge of death and they have to think about succession. And the people that they initially want to pick are either reluctant to do it or think there should be a different succession plan set in place, but one that involves somebody that's currently serving their jail time. And some people are not prepared to wait or have more nefarious means and desires for the Yakuza gang itself. And you have a couple of very strong central performances of people and characters and actors that you will recognize from other films around this genre. Something that's thoroughly enjoyable, and I think one of the very best examples of this kind of film. Radiance as a label, it was going to be interesting to see where they produce their content. Obviously Fran, who came from Arrow, was very much in the camp of pushing for Arrow Academy titles, and it was interesting, going to be interesting to see where they pitched Radiance's own line of films. And while Yakuza films classically sat in Arrow Video, I could definitely see this as an Arrow Academy type title as well. Really terrific release that's supplemented with some great extras. We have a couple of visual essays and conversations that place Big Time Gambling Boss within the context of other Yakuza films around that time, which is the type of extra that I really want to delve into, which is, you know, its historical significance, especially that it predates some of those other films that I've talked about by a number of years in terms of style, and also in period that with which it's shot. It's just a little bit previous to that, from, you know, the turn of the World War. It's a bit before that, 1930s Japan. And we also have a booklet here, it's about 28 pages long, that, amongst other things, goes through the actors that are involved, many of whom you will recognise, like I say, Lone Wolf and Cub. But many are other character actors that you've seen in a lot of things, playing familiar roles, I think I would be saying, and something that puts together, and when you put this on your shelf, and you put it away, you slot it away, you'll think to yourself, that's a really comprehensive release. And I think one of the mission statements that Fran's talked about is the fact that when they're thinking about extras to put together, does this represent, what other angle would you be looking at that it doesn't really seem covered yet? And that's not something I think you can accuse this of. So that is Big Time Gambling Boss, and that is one of the very first releases from Radiance Films. Next up is an Arrow Video release, and this one is Dunwich Horror. Not easy to say. A Lovecraftian tale of a film that's an AIP production. So AIP, if those who don't know, is Roger Corman, low budget film company, and I have to say I'm surprised because I think this is a particularly good looking and well represented and very well shot, with outside locations and inner lavish kind of inner locations as well that are sort of reminiscent of late Hammer titles. But this one stars Dean Stockwell. Dean Stockwell is like the heir or the lord of the big house up on the hill that's a bit weird, and that weird and wonderful things seem to have happened in. And he gets an interest in a local university, is reading a certain text, historical text, with a professor there. You'll not need me to tell you which text it is if you know anything about Lovecraftian horror or otherwise. But he's got 2 students who are very interested in this professor and his work. Not romantically, but intellectually. But Dean Stockwell gets particular interest in one of these 2 students, and we are left to ponder whether his interest is romantic or whether he has other more nefarious, more twisted desires and means for her subject of interest. A really enjoyable movie and watch, and one that I will say that in typical Lovecraftian style I think falls apart in the last quarter as they try and pull it together and make like a reasonable explanation, or maybe it's just I've seen that explanation too many times to really enjoy it. But overall, a really lovely release with a utterly gorgeous slipcover, if you don't mind me saying. Worth pointing out the extras. There's another commentary that I didn't really enjoy. I have to say it's a bit too jokey and jovial. I wanted a bit more meat to the bones, but it is a nice contrast to one of the other extras, which is a conversation between film historians and authors who really delve into Lovecraft, like a Zoom call-esque, and delve into the history of this film and the making of this film. And it's also got one of those David Hockfield extras where he talks about the music and the soundtrack of the film as well. They're always a real treat and something I really look forward to whenever I see them on a release. Dunwich, really good start of the year for Arrow as well. They came out with Executioner, which is also fantastic. You know, a big fan of Arrow's changing direction that we've got so far this year. Next up is a non-boutique Blu-ray release of a film that's bound to get a boutique Blu-ray release very shortly, but one that I watched as part of like a movie club with Steve Talks Movies, a friend who has recently released a movies channel to complement his books channel, where we did a spoiler talk of a movie of the month, which happened to be Strange Days by Catherine Bigelow. Now, this was not available in streaming in the UK. Ho hum. How can a Bigelow film not be available on streaming? So I picked up the Blu-ray release, and I'm glad that I did, because this, Ralph Fiennes, Juliette Lewis, Angela Bassett, Tom Sizemore, there's an absolute stream of people that you will recognise in this film that kind of is the take on the near future, and their take on, or her take on Blade Runner-esque. We've got a world where people sell memories. You know, there's sold VR devices called squids that sit in people's heads, where we live and experience other people's memories and emotions through them. So we don't just see what's happening, we feel what's happening. And it talks about this as an entertainment industry in terms of, you know, obviously the erotic nature of those memories that you can sell, but also the experiences that you can sell. You know, can you sell what it's like to feel like to murder somebody, to take part in a bank robbery, to experience all those things rather than just see them? Is that good for society? Is it danger? Is it sort of black market-esque as it appears to be in this? And it's all run by an ex-cop, somebody that's removed for something they did in the force, played by Ralph Fiennes. And we get a really, really interesting, well thought out look at this, all in this 90s prestige style of the films that were being released at the time. I thoroughly enjoyed Strange Days. It's a movie that was probably a bit too long for its time, but it kind of flies by. It never drags. It's really good pacing through it, and it does prompt some really interesting ideas about the meaning of cybernetics and AI and VR for us in our future. You know, in terms of the impact of whether using those experiences for good or bad, or whether it just stunts and hurts progress emotionally or developmentally or lifestyle-wise, whether people get caught in memories rather because they can relive them quite easily. Really fascinating film, and one that will almost certainly get an Arrow video probably released sometime in the future, that's wrapped in very good extras as well. Utterly loved it. Talking about things that I already loved, I have Dekanalog's release of Detention, a Chinese-Taiwanese look at a period of time in China where the government were trying to control outside interference in terms of culture into the world. So this one's set in Taiwan and in a school where it is outlawed whether people should be reading texts that aren't government approved, or even books or literature, just generally clamping down on outside influences. And the fact that those whole things have been outlawed, and yet we have a group of students and teachers who are meeting in secret all the time to discuss these books that they aren't allowed to, etc. The oppressive nature of the government and the army find out about this and come down to close ranks, and it's all done while there's this like horrific entity also that seems to be stalking and seeking them out, and you get what is pretty much a period set horror film, which it turns out is one of my absolute favourite things, as I'm finding out over these past couple of years. Take a good horror film set in a period, late 60s China here, and you get something that's utterly watchable. Detention is based on a video game, as it turns out, one that I actually recognised when I started to go through the extras, and I hadn't made the connection, but a really utterly fascinating, moody, and ultimately atmospheric wonder of a film, and one that I really enjoyed. Really captures the time and feel and the scary, oppressive nature of, you know, the political things that were going on around that time, but manifests in creatures and horrors, and then basically in hurt, killed, slasher, or in slasher style or otherwise. Utterly fascinating and utterly great. Last one I'm going to talk about is a film that sat on my shelf for a very long time. One that I bought because it was cheap and thought, oh well, that's a British film curiosity. This one's from 1963 and very much fits in the slew of films that were made in support of musical acts around this time. You had Hard Day's Night with the Beatles, you had Catch Me If You Can, The Small Faces much later, and this one was featuring the Shadows and Cliff Richard, specifically in Summer Holiday. Now, I'm very well aware of the song Summer Holiday by Cliff Richard, but hadn't really thought that there'd be much about the film. I thought it'd be quite cheap. I thought it would be kind of just a vehicle for him to run around and sing. I don't think I was prepared for, quite how handsome a man Clifford Richard was in those days, with the string vests and stuff. Anyway, I was surprised by this movie, given that I am a fan of musicals, and how much and how well and how competently and beautiful this film is. Beautifully shot, beautiful print. I was unprepared for how gorgeous and sumptuous the film would be in terms of their moving through locations, and just generally how much of a fun caper it is. I mean, like all musicals, it's sort of ridiculous in its premise and how they burst into song from speaking. Nearly somebody asks a question and somebody sings a song as the response. Ridiculous, of course, but we have a story of four mechanics, played by the Shadows, who decide to fix up a London bus and go on a trip to take that bus on their summer holiday to Athens. Along the way, they pick up numerous people along the way that enrich and create more capers in their story, including a dubious young boy who may or may not be a missing American singer at the time. Nothing too serious in this movie at all, nothing too outlandish or ridiculous, but an utterly fun time, and one that I had way underplayed, and I'm really recommending to you, because if you had the same opinion of this film, having not seen it, and you do like musicals of some sort, I think you'll get a lot out of Summer Holiday. Of course, if you don't like musicals, you can discard all that I've just said. That's my watch list for this week. I hope you find it something interesting in there to talk about, and you can let me know if you've seen any of these movies or seen anything that's like these movies that you'd like to recommend. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time on the watch list. Take care, all the best, bye.